Joining us now, Eddie Glaude Jr., MS Now political analyst and professor at Princeton University. He's also the author of the new book, America USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries. And also with us, Michele Norris, MS Now senior contributing editor. Thank you both for joining us this morning. I hope you are not nursing too bad of a July 4th hangover. But Eddie, I want to start with you and ask you about why you think that a part of our society is so comfortable in this moment in time in explicitly showing the double consciousness of our American history that you so often talk about.
First of all, it's great to begin the morning with each of you. I think it's important to acknowledge that Donald Trump's administration, Donald Trump's political presence over the last 10 years has given a permission structure for the ugly underbelly of America to become more explicit. It used to be the case, I think part of the post-consensus of the mid-20th century freedom movements was that kind of explicit racism was moved to the margins of American politics. You could engage in racial dog whistles, but you couldn't be explicitly racist. Just think about how David Duke kind of brought how he was treated and eventually marginalized. Think about Pat Buchanan and the way in which he was embraced and then eventually marginalized. But now that sort of rhetoric, those dog whistles, no one engages in dog whistles anymore. It's just kind of foghorns. So I think there has been a permission structure to allow a certain segment of the country to declare that America must remain a white republic. And they're doing it in the midst of woke scare, in the midst of communism and the like. So here we are, just dealing with the legacy of the country in full view in this moment in its 250th year.
You know, Michele, speaking of the ugly underbelly of the country, this legacy of our nation, I want to put up a startling set of pictures. Let's put it up. There's the black women on the metro here in Washington, surrounded by those folks from the Patriot Front, and then on the left is that classic photo of Elizabeth Eckford surrounded by fellow students at Little Rock Central High School. She is one of the Little Rock Nine. The parallels here, the symmetry here is startling, Michele.
That photo is probably Pulitzer worthy. It's a little early to start talking about that, but you know that photo is one instance of a woman on a bus surrounded by people who are wearing masks, who are about to march in Washington carrying Confederate flags. But I see that photo and I see America's workplaces. I see America's school systems. I mean, those men are wearing masks, but they go and they surround women like her in their workplaces. They will go back to a place where they can take off their mask, and then they will be working someplace where their noxious ideas, will be put in place in hiring decisions, in decisions about who gets a mortgage and who doesn't. However, when I look at them marching, trying to project power, I don't see power, I see fear. I see the projection of fear. I see people who are afraid of a future that has already arrived. They are afraid of an America that is multicultural. They are worried about a multicultural democracy. They are worried about losing power. They want to create an America where white people and white men are dominant. And, America has to then decide, do we want to hold on to our superpower status? Do we want to be prominent in the world, or do we want to be a supremacist nation? Because, if we do not produce enough college-educated white men to drive our GDP. When you go to the doctor, who is serving you? When you go to the hospital, who is serving you? When you look at our economy, who is holding it up with their hands and their shoulders and their intellect and their hard work? That is the America that will keep moving us forward. And the people who are fighting for this supremacist idea, these supremacist ideas, are willing to sacrifice all of that for the sake of their own power structure and this need to feel like they are above someone else. They are willing to put America in a lower position globally in order to continue to elevate themselves.
I mean, those losers that were walking around D.C. with those masks on yesterday, Michele, what when I see folks like that, I see exactly what you see when you say you see fear, because they know what they have done with being the majority in this country. And so their concern is that we, black women, brown women, the black and brown folks who at some point will inherit the majority of this country, will do the same thing to them that they have done to us. I'm going to say that before I play. I want to move on because I'm getting a little emotional here. Vice President J.D. Vance spoke yesterday about people who criticize America and what that means. And I want you guys to listen to this.
You will hear a couple small but loud voices today speak obsessively not of our national greatness, but of our national imperfections. They will speak of the powerless and the dispossessed. They will tell you that America is just another country where the weak struggle against the strong. So what I'd ask you to do, my fellow Americans, on our 250th birthday, is to reject the two-dimensional view of your fellow citizens and reject the two-dimensional view of your country.
Speak obsessively not of our national greatness, but of our national imperfections. Donald Trump, Eddie Glaude, has only done that for years. He started his political career by doing that. He has talked about the crumbling America for a decade. So he could be talking about the president here. I think he's pretending like he's not. But even Donald Trump knows that if you seemingly love a country, that you should be able to say what you want and criticize it. So what is the J.D. Vance talking about here?
Well, let's put that. We could just look at the American Carnage speech, right, and just give an example of exactly what you're talking about. But I want you to understand, Eugene, that this is an ideological position. They reject more perfect union talk altogether because for them, America's perfection was secured in its founding. And that's all we need to do is to remember and restore. To talk about more perfect union is to talk about all of the failings, right? The failures with regards to slavery, with regards to women, with regards to child labor, with regards to workers and the like, right? So for them, that kind of conversation, right, exposes the country and it opens up this kind of multicultural imagining of America, this multiracial imagining of America. They want to shut that down. J.D. Vance wants us to simply shut up, those of us who look like me, right? They want us to shut up and be grateful. That's what they want us to do. And I think it's really important for us to understand the way in which they're mobilizing the founding for their white supremacist ends. And J.D. Vance tries to put it in kind of flowery language or makes it sound reasonable. But at the end of the day, what he's arguing, right, is that America is more than an idea. America is rooted in a culture that is fundamentally about blood and soil. Donald Trump said that in front of Mount Rushmore. He said, what? He said, American identity, American freedom. There's no American freedom without American culture. That's a quote. And so I think we need to understand these folk for who they are and name the devil that has us by the throat. These are white nationalists for sure.
Michelle, let's get a little bit into Donald Trump's message last night and what he had to say about the semi-quincentennial.
Unlike so many others in the world, in this country, we have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equal justice under the law, although I wasn't treated that well, but we won't get into that. We rebuilt our military in my first term. We use it a little bit in our, well, actually, I should say third term, but I won't do that because I don't want any controversy.
When I was rewatching the speech this morning, I'm sorry to say I was not able to stay awake last night to watch it in real time, despite the fireworks' best efforts to keep me awake. It was hard for me not to think of the other major moment that we just saw in this country that you were witness to, which was the opening of the Obama Presidential Center. When you are comparing and contrasting these two speeches, what are your takeaways about today's Republican and Democratic Party?
I'm glad you mentioned the opening of the Obama Presidential Center, which had its own 250th celebration on the patio open to the public in Chicago, because that was another split screen moment of two very distinct Americas on display. When they planned that center, they could not have known that it would open in the midst of rising autocracy in this country. But you see, they're two very different ideas of an America from two very, very different leaders. One who is perplexed by the other, and one who, again, I go back to fear, who seems to be afraid of the other one. Barack Obama owns a lot of real estate in Donald Trump's head, and he continually talks about, how he's trying to fix something that was broken, that, is looking for a problem that doesn't exist. But I want to go back to what J.D. Vance was talking about and trying to prevent America from looking at its flaws. Mamdani gave an interesting counter speech, talking about immigration yesterday. And one of the things he talked about is how patriotism is about embracing the ideas of America, but also confronting its flaws and doing both at the same time. And one of the things that concerns me about the hijacking of the semi-sesquicentennial, this important milestone in America, is the idea that one party, one faction really of the party, the Republican Party, would try to take the American flag and wrest it away from its people. And as I talk to you, the flag is flying in front of our house. And, I yesterday went to a reading of Frederick Douglass's speech, what to the Negro is the 4th of July. And I understand the founding contradictions of this country, but I really worry about the idea that the faction of this party wants to take the flag away from all of us, wants to remove the centrality of that symbol from the people who built this country, because that flag holds our pain and our plunder. It holds our bounty as well. And it's important, I think, to understand that patriotism is needed in this moment. But patriotism is not just about flying a flag and saying who's on top and who's on the bottom. The true patriotism is trying to fix a country that has flaws, is trying to understand how to push a country forward. And that is one of the things that I'm very concerned about in the celebration of the 250th, is that they took it away from America and they made it all about Donald Trump, which is one of the reasons I'm not directly answering your question, because I don't want to talk about him. Actually, I want to talk about the American people and what this means to them in imagining a future that they deserve.